You smell it long before you see the stone walls. A thick, oily wall of rot, human excrement, and the acrid sting of sea coal smoke that clings to the back of your throat like a layer of grease. This is London in the year 1300, and if you're expecting a world of shining nights and romantic cobblestone streets, prepare for a violent awakening. Within these gates, 30,000 people are squeezed into a square mile of rotting timber and open sewers. In the next 24 hours, your modern senses will be assaulted, your stomach will turn, and your very survival will depend on dodging threats that are invisible to the naked eye. We'll use AI reconstructions to bring this world into focus. If you make one mistake here, one sip of the wrong water, or one step into the wrong shadow, you don't get a second chance. You are about to step into a reality where the air itself feels like a physical weight. But the most terrifying danger isn't the stench. It's the hidden mechanism of the street that is currently waiting to swallow you whole. A massive timber cart screeches past you, its iron-rimmed wheels churning the street into a chocolate-colored soup of horse manure and crushed offal. Quick check-in. Comment your location and local time, and subscribe for more cinematic history. The bridge beneath your feet is a claustrophobic tunnel of multi-story houses overhanging a roaring river, and the air is thick with the copper tang of blood and the salt of dried fish. You've just witnessed a pack horse lose its footing on the slick wooden planks, its legs snapping with a sickening crack, before the driver simply pushes it toward the edge. In 1300, London Bridge is a gauntlet of chaos, where the living walk beneath the blackened, shriveled heads of traitors mounted on iron spikes, their empty sockets staring down at the struggle below. You remember the first rule of survival. Your modern immune system is a high-tech fortress, but here, it's a liability. You have zero resistance to the prehistoric strains of bacteria thriving in every handshake and every splash of mud. The logistics of the bridge are a triumph of medieval engineering and a disaster for human health. Beneath the floorboards, the starlings, massive wooden piers, restrict the Thames so tightly that the water drops 5 feet from one side to the other, creating a permanent, deafening roar known as shooting the bridge. Small boats frequently capsize in the churning white water, dumping passengers into a freezing current thick with the city's concentrated sewage. You see a man at a stall selling meat pies, his hands stained dark with the soot of his coal fire and the grease of unidentified fat. He doesn't wash. He simply wipes his fingers on a rag that hasn't seen soap in a month. You feel the first pang of hunger, but you've already seen enough to know that eating here is a gamble with your life. But the chaos of the bridge is just the threshold. As you push deeper into the city's heart, the buildings lean in closer, blocking the sun and trapping a humid, pulsating heat. You noticed the man on the bridge wiped his hands, but you didn't notice what was crawling in the seams of that rag. By the end of this part, you'll know why the most dangerous thing in London isn't a mugger's knife. It's the very ground you're forced to walk on. The mud has already claimed your boots, pulling at your heels with a rhythmic, wet suction. And then you see it. The central gutter overflowing with a slow-moving black slurry that seems to be twitching with a life of its own. The mud of London is not merely wet earth. It is a living, breathing archive of everything the city rejects. As you drag your feet through the London Shuffle, you're navigating the Kennel, a shallow central trench that serves as the city's primary digestive tract. You remember the twitching sludge from the bridge, but as you move toward Cheapside, the reality becomes much worse. You see a woman empty a wooden bucket from a third-story window. The liquid arcs through the air, a pale yellow stream of urine and kitchen slop that splatters just inches from your shoulder. This is the daily logistics of a city without pipes. Every ounce of waste produced by 30,000 people must go somewhere, and usually that somewhere is right under your nose. The muck rakers are the only thin line between the citizens and a total tidal wave of filth. You watch a man dressed in stiff, salt-caked leather, dragging a heavy wooden rake through the black mire. His job is to pull the solids, rotting cabbage stalks, animal bones, and human night soil, into piles to be loaded onto horse-drawn carts. But the rake only catches the large debris. The liquid, a toxic tea of pathogens, soaks into the porous timber of the houses and the very soil you stand on. The air here is so thick with the smell of ammonia and sulfur that you find yourself breathing through your teeth to filter the taste. You notice a local baker dropping a fresh loaf of bread into the dust. He picks it up, blows on it casually, and hands it to a customer. Your modern brain screams infection, but to him, this is just Tuesday. By the end of this part, you'll understand that the ground isn't just dirty, it's a biological weapon. You feel a strange, sharp stinging on your shins, hidden beneath the hem of your trousers. You look down and realize your socks are saturated with the liquid from the kennel. The survival rules you memorized are failing. You thought you could just stay clean. But in a city where the houses lean together like conspirators, shielding the filth from the purifying rays of the sun, there is no such thing as clean. You are now a walking petri dish, carrying the city's decay on your skin. But as the midday sun reaches its zenith, the heat begins to bake the mud into a fine gray dust that you are now inhaling with every breath. Your throat is parched, and the sight of the great conduit up ahead promises relief. You see a line of people filling leather buckets with water that looks clear and cold, but no one tells you about the cracks in the lead pipes or what is seeping into them from the nearby churchyards. The great conduit stands as a rare monument of stone in a city of rotting wood, promising the one thing your body is now screaming for: water. You've been breathing the dust of dried manure and coal ash for hours, and your throat feels like it's been scraped with a rusted file. You watch the locals jostling for position, their leather buckets clanking against the lead cistern. But before you cup your hands to drink, you notice a thin, oily film shimmering on the surface of the water. This water has traveled miles through lead pipes from the Tyburn Springs, but as it enters the city, the logistics of medieval plumbing turn a miracle into a death sentence. The pipes are old, porous, and buried just inches away from the city's overflowing cesspits. By the end of this part, you'll understand why the most refreshing drink in London is actually a slow-acting poison. You see a young girl dip a wooden cup into the cistern, her fingers caked in the gray grime of the street. She drinks deeply, unaware that the clear liquid is likely teeming with the invisible precursors to cholera and typhoid. If you drink this, your 24-hour survival challenge will likely end in a cramped room with a fever that melts your mind. The locals have a workaround, but it isn't much better. They turn to small ale. This isn't the craft beer you know. It's a thick, cloudy, low-alcohol fermented grain water that is boiled during the brewing process, accidentally killing most of the bacteria that make the water lethal. The brewing logistics are a grueling, endless cycle, performed mostly by alewives in cramped back rooms. They boil the mash in massive copper kettles over open fires, filling the narrow alleys with a heavy, sweet scent of fermented malt that briefly masks the stench of the kennel. But the small ale is often served in communal wooden tankards that are rarely scrubbed. You take a sip from a vendor's cup, and the taste is sour, gritty with yeast, and lukewarm. It barely hydrates you, yet it's the only thing keeping you from an agonizing death by dehydration. As you swallow the murky liquid, you feel a dull ache beginning to throb behind your eyes, the first sign that the city is starting to win. But the sour ale is only a distraction from a much more visceral hunger. As you follow the scent of roasting meat toward the district known as the Shambles, the air turns heavy and metallic. You saw the girl at the conduit drinking her fill, but you didn't see the butcher just around the corner cleaning his knives in the same runoff. You're about to enter the most blood-soaked square mile in England, where the line between food and filth disappears entirely. The smell hits you like a physical barrier. A warm, sickeningly sweet cloud of raw iron and rotting fat. You've entered the Shambles, London's central slaughterhouse district, and the ground here is no longer brown mud. It is a deep, pulsating crimson. By the end of this part, you'll know the terrifying truth about the fresh meat served on medieval tables. Around you, butchers are working with terrifying speed, their leather aprons so stiff with dried blood they could stand up on their own. There is no refrigeration, no inspectors, and no mercy. The logistics of feeding 30,000 people meat in 1300 means the animals, pigs, sheep, and cattle, are driven alive through the filthy streets, defecating in fear before being butchered right on the pavement. You watch as a butcher swings a heavy cleaver, splitting a carcass in a spray of bone shards and gristle. The offal, the lungs, the bladders, the intestines, is simply tossed into the kennel to rot in the sun. The money shot of this horror is the disposal system. When the gutters clog with congealed fat and blood, the butchers simply wait for a heavy rain to wash the gore down toward the Thames. In the meantime, the heat of the afternoon turns the street into a massive, open-air incubator. Thousands of black flies swarm in such thick clouds that you have to wave your hands in front of your face just to see the path ahead. One of them lands on your lip, its legs sticky with the fluids of a diseased cow, and you realize with a jolt of terror that the danger isn't just under your feet anymore. It's airborne. The thing meant to nourish you is what poisons you. You pass a cookshop where meat pies are browning over a charcoal fire. They smell incredible, a savory escape from the stench of the street. But you notice the cook refreshing a piece of gray, slimy meat by rubbing it with salt and heavy spices like cloves and pepper. In medieval London, spices aren't just for flavor. They are chemical masks used to hide the taste of decay. If you buy that pie, you're eating flesh that may have been sitting in the humidity for days, teeming with parasites that will hatch in your gut before the sun rises tomorrow. You turn away, your stomach churning, and try to find a side alley for a moment of peace. But as you look up at the overhanging houses, you realize the threat has shifted again. The danger is no longer just at eye level. Above you, a wooden shutter creaks open, and for a split second, the world goes silent. A wooden shutter creaks open 3 stories above your head, and a heavy, rhythmic splash echoes against the timber walls. You jump back just in time as a deluge of grayish-green sludge hits the cobbles where you stood a second ago. This is the "look out below" rule in its most literal, lethal form. In a city where land is at a premium, London has grown vertically, and the logistics of the human bathroom have become a vertical game of Russian roulette. By the end of this part, you'll understand the terrifying physics of the medieval cesspit and why night soil was the most feared substance in the kingdom. The houses here are equipped with garderobes, small protruding wooden boxes that hang over the street or an internal shaft. They are essentially toilets that rely entirely on gravity. In the best-case scenario, your waste falls into a cesspit, a deep, brick-lined hole in the basement. But these pits are rarely emptied. The logistics of cleaning them are so foul that it's a job reserved for the gong farmers, men who are legally only allowed to work at night and must live in isolated communities. They descend into these pits with buckets and ropes, working in air so thick with methane that men have been known to asphyxiate and fall into the very filth they were hired to remove. The money shot of this horror is the pressure. Over decades, these cesspits can become sealed by layers of waste, allowing methane gas to build up to explosive levels. There are records of medieval basements literally erupting, sending a geyser of human excrement through the floorboards of the unsuspecting family living above. You see a crack in the foundation of the house next to you, and a slow, dark liquid is seeping through the stone, staining the street with a smell so concentrated it makes your eyes water. The soil is saturated. The walls are weeping. The city is quite literally drowning in its own biology. You try to wipe a stray drop of moisture from your forehead, but your hand is already coated in the fine, soot-heavy grime of the London air. The sun is beginning to dip, casting long, distorted shadows through the jettied houses, and the temperature is dropping. But the cooling air doesn't bring relief. As the light fades, the bells of St. Mary-le-Bow begin to toll, a heavy, mournful iron sound that signals the curfew. This isn't just a suggestion to go home. It's a warning that the rules of the city are about to change. No one tells you this part, but when the sun goes down, London stops being a cesspool and starts being a predatory labyrinth. The tolling of the bells isn't a call to prayer. It is the sound of the city's iron gates slamming shut. As the sun dips below the horizon, the golden light is replaced by a thick, suffocating gloom. In 1300, there are no streetlights, no glow from shop windows, and no safety. The curfew, derived from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire, is a legal mandate. You watch as the locals frantically pull in their shutters and bar their heavy oak doors. Within minutes, the bustling metropolis becomes a ghost town of silent, towering silhouettes. If you are caught on the street after the final chime, without a light and a very good reason, the city's watch will treat you as a criminal. But the watch is the least of your worries. The no one tells you this part moment is the shift in the environment itself. As the temperature drops, the humidity from the Thames and the moisture from the kennel rise to meet the cooling air, creating a fog so dense you can't see your own hand in front of your face. This isn't a clean, natural mist. It's a pea souper of coal smoke and evaporated sewage. You try to navigate by touch, feeling the damp, slimy timber of the houses, but the street layout is a medieval maze of dead ends and stinking lanes. One wrong turn, and you aren't just lost, you are trapped. The mud, now invisible in the dark, has turned into a freezing, slippery grease. You slip, your hands plunging into a pile of something cold and soft that definitely isn't clay. The logistics of the night are governed by the hue and cry. Because there is no police force, every citizen is responsible for the law. If a crime is committed, you are expected to scream at the top of your lungs, and every man within earshot must drop what he is doing and join the chase. In the pitch black of a London night, this system is a recipe for bloody chaos. You hear a sudden shout from an alleyway over, a high, panicked shriek followed by the thunder of boots on wet wood. You freeze. In the darkness, the mob cannot tell a witness from a thief. If they find you standing over a body, even if you're just a confused traveler, you will face alleyway justice before you can even explain your clothes. You press yourself into a doorway, trying to become part of the shadows. The cold is starting to seep into your bones, and that sharp itch on your ankle from the afternoon has turned into a hot, throbbing soreness. You feel a lump forming in your groin, a tender, swollen node that makes every step an agony. You thought the mud was the worst thing you'd face, but the city has already planted a seed inside you that is beginning to bloom. By the end of this part, you'll realize that your 24-hour survival is no longer about the streets. It's about the war being fought inside your own blood. The throbbing in your groin is no longer an itch. It is a hot, pulsing drum. As you huddle in the darkness of the doorway, you realize the city's invisible predators have finally breached your defenses. In 1300, a simple scratch or a flea bite isn't a minor annoyance. It is an opening act for a lethal infection. You are shivering, but your skin is burning to the touch. By the end of this part, you'll see the horrific logistics of medieval medicine and why the cure was often more terrifying than the disease. You need help, and in the distance, you see a flickering candle behind a window displaying a brass bowl and a blood-stained cloth. This is the shop of a barber surgeon. The interior of the shop is a nightmare of sensory overload. The smell of stale blood competes with the scent of burnt herbs and vinegar. There are no doctors here, only men who cut hair, pull teeth, and saw through bone. The money shot of medieval medical logistics is the practice of bloodletting. The barber doesn't ask for your symptoms. He believes your humors are out of balance. He reaches for a fleam, a rusted folding steel blade, and prepares to open a vein in your arm. There is no anesthesia. There is only a wooden peg for you to bite on, and a ceramic bowl to catch the dark, sluggish stream of your life force. He hasn't cleaned the blade since the last patient, a man coughing up black phlegm who sat in that same chair an hour ago. The thing meant to heal you is what kills you. As the barber works, he might apply a poultice made of pigeon dung and crushed flour to your swollen nodes, believing it will draw out the poison. In reality, he is pressing a concentrated paste of bacteria directly into an open wound. You watch a fly land on the edge of the blood bowl, then hop onto the barber's sleeve. The cycle of contamination is perfect and unbroken. If you survive the bloodletting, you still have to face the cautery, the use of a red-hot iron to sizzle your flesh shut, a process that fills the small room with the sickening scent of roasting meat. You stumble back out into the freezing fog, your arm bandaged in a scrap of grey linen that smells of lye and old sweat. The bloodletting has left you lightheaded, your vision swimming as the fog turns the city into a shifting, spectral world. You are weaker now, your body's resources drained just as the city's most dangerous hour approaches. You hear the sound of heavy, rhythmic splashing again, but this time it isn't waste falling from a window. It's the sound of many feet moving in unison through the muck, and they are heading straight for your shadow. The splashing footsteps aren't a figment of your fever. Out of the swirling grey fog, the Watch emerges. A group of men armed with heavy iron-tipped pikes and flickering crescent lanterns that cast long, dancing shadows against the timber walls. They don't look like protectors. They look like hunters. In medieval London, the law is a blunt instrument. By the end of this part, you'll understand the terrifying reality of dark alley justice and why being a stranger in the night is a capital offense. One of the men thrusts a lantern toward your face, the heat of the flames singeing your eyelashes, and demands to know your mystery, your trade. Your silence and your strange modern clothes are all the evidence they need. The logistics of punishment in 1300 are designed for public spectacle and maximum pain. If they decide you are a vagabond, they won't take you to a clean cell. You'll be dragged toward the stocks or the pillory in Cornhill. Here your head and hands are locked into heavy oak beams, forcing your body into a grueling, bone-cracking crouch. But the wooden frame isn't the punishment. It's just the stage. As the sun begins to peek over the horizon, The city wakes up with a thirst for blood. Passers-by don't just mock you, they pelt you with the very money shots of the city's filth. Rotten entrails from the shambles, jagged stones and dead cats pulled from the kennel. There is no mercy for the outsider. But then a sudden pattern break occurs. A cry of fire erupts from the next block over. In a city built of pitch-soaked timber and thatched straw, a single tipped candle is a weapon of mass destruction. The watch immediately forgets you, dropping their pikes to join a desperate bucket brigade. You watch as men scramble onto rooftops with fire hooks, literally tearing houses apart to create a firebreak. The logistics are brutal. To save the city, they must destroy the homes of the poor. The roar of the flames, the screaming of trapped livestock, and the blinding heat turn the morning air into a furnace. You realize that in London, your life can be extinguished by a stray spark just as easily as by a germ. You slip away in the confusion, your heart hammering against your ribs. You are shivering with fever. Your arm is throbbing from the barber's blade, and your lungs are scorched by the smoke. You have reached the 24-hour mark. You find a small, polished pewter plate discarded in the mud and look at your reflection. The person staring back is hollow-eyed, covered in a layer of grey soot and dried blood, unrecognizable from the traveller who stood at the gates yesterday morning. No one tells you this part, but survival here isn't about strength. It's about what you're willing to leave behind. The sun rises over the Thames, but it brings no warmth, only a cold, pale light that reveals the true scale of the wreckage. You have survived 24 hours in London, yet you feel less like a victor and more like a ghost. As the city hums back to life, the London shuffle begins again. Thousands of feet churning the same toxic mud you've been fighting since yesterday. You stand by the river, watching the tide pull the city's filth out toward the sea, realizing that the resilience required to draw a single breath here is more than most modern humans possess in a lifetime. By the end of this journey, you see the irony. These people, living in what we would call a biological death trap, were the architects of the world we inhabit today. The logistics of their survival were built on a staggering human cost. For every grand cathedral or stone bridge, there were 10,000 lives cut short by a sip of water or a flea's bite. And yet, amidst the stench of the shambles and the terror of the dark alleys, there was a profound, stubborn humanity. You see a mother leaning out of a window to hand a crust of bread to a beggar. You see a merchant laughing with a friend despite the soot-heavy air. They didn't just exist in this filth. They built guilds, they wrote laws, and they maintained a society that refused to collapse under the weight of its own decay. You walk toward the city gates, your boots heavy with the weight of 1,000 years of grime. You are leaving, but you carry the city with you, in your lungs, on your skin, and in the memory of the sheer, visceral terror of a world without safety nets. We often look back at history through a golden lens, dreaming of simpler times. But the reality of 1300 is a violent reminder that progress is written in blood and sanitized with the very luxuries we now take for granted. You are a survivor of the greatest gauntlet on Earth. But as you step back into the light of the modern world, you'll never look at a glass of clean water or a paved street the same way again. The true lesson of medieval London isn't just that it was gross. It's that the human spirit is the only thing more persistent than the plague. We look at their lives and see a nightmare, but they looked at their city and saw the future. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the mud and blood of history, make sure to leave a comment about which era you want us to reconstruct next. Your support helps us keep these stories alive, and luckily, it doesn't require a trip to a medieval barber. Subscribe for more cinematic history, and stay grateful for the soap in your bathroom. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.